He makes me feel alive in ways you never did," my fiancé said proudly across dinner. I calmly nodded, canceled the ceremony, sold our dream home, closed every shared account, and walked away quietly. Months later, a friend called explaining why that thrilling romance didn't last long. "He makes me feel alive in ways you never did." She said it like a compliment, like she was doing me a favor by finally letting those words leave her mouth after God knows how long she had been holding them. Like I should be grateful for the honesty. Like the courage it had taken her to say it deserved some kind of applause. I set my fork down slowly. I reached for my water glass. I took one long, measured sip, and then I looked at her, really looked at her, across a dinner table that had cost me $300 in 4 weeks on a waiting list to book. She was still smiling when she said it. Not a cruel smile, not even a guilty one. It was the smile of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment in the mirror so many times that she had finally moved past the anxiety and into something that felt like performance. Confident, prepared, delivered. I nodded once, said nothing. That silence probably told her everything she needed to know about what was coming. But she mistook it for confusion. People always underestimate what lives inside quiet men. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. We had been together for 4 years, engaged for 14 months. The wedding was 11 weeks away. I was 31 years old, and I had built what I genuinely believed was a good life. Not a showy one, not a loudly successful one, but a solid, well-constructed life that I was proud of in the way you're proud of something you actually built rather than stumbled into. I owned a house. Not rented, owned. A 3-bedroom place with a backyard and a kitchen she had picked out every tile and countertop for. She had spent 3 weekends choosing the countertops alone. Granite with a particular gray vein running through it that she had driven 40 minutes out of town to find at a specialty supplier. I had stood in that showroom with her, watching her run her hand along the surface of the stone like it was something alive. I had found that endearing at the time. I find that memory painful now, not for the obvious reason, for the subtler one. Because it strikes me, in retrospect, that someone who invests that much energy choosing the countertop of a shared kitchen is someone who has, at some level, still decided to be in the kitchen. And there must have been a moment, a specific, identifiable moment that I never got to witness, when she quietly changed her mind about all of it. I run a small but profitable commercial photography business. I photograph architecture and interiors. It is not a glamorous profession in the cinematic sense, but it is one that rewards patience and precision and a genuine eye for the way light falls on a surface and what that falling reveals. I had been good at it for a long time. I had a savings account that never embarrassed me. I had, for 4 years, a partner who seemed to love the version of me that showed up every day. Her name was Nicole, and she was the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately changes the quality of the air in it. Not through spectacle. She wasn't loud or dramatic or particularly interested in being the center of anything. She did it through attention. She noticed things. She could walk into a restaurant and within minutes, she'd have identified the most interesting person in the room, the best untried item on the menu, and the one detail in the ceiling or the molding that the original designer had clearly agonized over. She noticed my work that way. We hadn't even met yet. She had found my portfolio online, through a professional platform, not a social one. And she sent me a direct message. It was 3 sentences long. It said, "I don't know how to explain what this photograph does, but the industrial series you posted from February is the loneliest and most beautiful thing I've seen all year. The warehouse one especially." That's not a portfolio inquiry, just a note. I had stared at that message for a long time before I responded. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because something in those 3 sentences told me this was a person worth being careful with. We were together within 2 months. Engaged 2 years after that. The proposal happened on a Saturday morning in February. No grand gesture. No restaurant with a hired violinist. Just the 2 of us in our kitchen, my kitchen, at that point, though she was there most weekends. With coffee going and morning light coming through the window the way it only does in winter, that low pale gold that doesn't stay long. I had the ring in my jacket pocket for 3 weeks before that morning. I had been waiting for a moment that felt real rather than performed. She was standing at the counter reading something on her phone, still in her pajamas, hair not done, completely unguarded. And I thought, this is it. This is the version of her I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life. I said her name. She looked up. I took the ring out of my pocket. She stared at it for a long time without saying anything. And then she started crying. which she had always claimed she would never do at something like this. She said yes before I even finished the question. I think about that morning sometimes. The unguarded version of her. The crying she claimed she'd never do. The yes that came before the question was complete. I think about it the way you think about the last day you felt safe inside something. Not with longing, exactly, but with a kind of careful attention. Like if you look at it long enough, you might finally understand exactly when it changed. And somewhere in the 14 months between that February morning and the restaurant dinner, she had gone looking for a different kind of aliveness. It started with a new job. Nicole had been working in marketing for a mid-sized agency downtown, doing solid work, earning recognition she genuinely deserved. Then, about 18 months before the dinner, she landed a role at a boutique firm. Smaller team, bigger clients, higher pressure and more creative latitude, and, I understand now, more room for the kind of charged interpersonal energy that forms quickly when ambitious people are pushed into close quarters under deadline. And a new colleague named Derek. I heard his name for the first time on a Wednesday evening when she came home buzzing with something I could only describe as overflow. The kind of charged up, slightly breathless way people talk when they're still vibrating from a conversation they haven't quite finished having in their own heads. Derek pitched this whole campaign concept today, and the client completely loved it. She said, barely past the front door, coat still on. I looked up from my desk. Derek, the new creative director? Senior strategist, she corrected. A little quickly. Right, I said. Anyway, it was a good day, she finished and floated into the kitchen like she was still somewhere else entirely. I went back to editing. It didn't register as anything then. People have colleagues. Colleagues have impressive days. That's just work. But Derek kept arriving in the conversation. Not in any alarming way at first. Just in the way that someone new and energizing bleeds into the edges of daily life when someone is genuinely lit up by them. He had apparently read every book she had stacked on her nightstand. He cooked, really cooked, not just pasta, but things with technique and depth and the kind of culinary patience that signals a person who genuinely invests in experience. He had traveled everywhere she had always told me she wanted to go. He rock climbed on weekends. He had strong opinions on obscure films she loved. The one she had quietly stopped trying to share with me somewhere around year 3 because I had never been able to match her enthusiasm for that particular genre. I noticed the pattern before I consciously named it. And when I finally named it, when I sat with it long enough to give it an honest label, I made the mistake that costs most men everything in these situations. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself it was friendship. I told myself that I trusted her. And I did trust her. That was never the actual question. The question I should have been asking was whether she still had the same investment in what we were building together. And I was too comfortable, too certain, too busy pouring time and money into the literal and figurative house of our shared life to notice that she had quietly stopped reading the blueprints. The changes were gradual, but they were unmistakable once you were honest enough to look directly at them. She started coming home later. Not every night. Not even most nights. Just enough that the silence at the dinner table began to feel inhabited by something neither of us was naming. She stopped asking about my shoots. I know commercial photography of interiors isn't the most thrilling thing to hear about over pasta, but she had always found a way in. She would flip through my contact sheets and point to a specific frame and explain, with real precision, exactly why it worked or didn't. She had a genuinely good eye, and she knew how to use it. She stopped doing that somewhere around month 4 of the new job. She started spending Saturday mornings at the gym and coming back in a mood that was distinctly lighter than the gym had ever produced in her before. The gym used to make her tired and satisfied. Now it made her bright-eyed and slightly distracted, like someone running 2 conversations at once. She started texting at the dinner table, which she had always considered a borderline act of bad faith in a relationship. She started finishing sentences with a laugh that felt like it originated from somewhere I wasn't. I cataloged every one of these departures the way a careful person catalogs weather before a storm, noting them, storing them, watching the pattern build without yet being willing to call it what it was. There was a specific evening I keep returning to. We were at a dinner party at Ben's place, 6 of us around a long table, good food, easy conversation. Nicole was seated next to someone she had just met, a friend of Ben's wife who worked in film production. I watched her from across the table for most of the evening. She was lit up, asking questions, leaning forward, laughing in that open way she had that made everyone in a conversation feel like the most interesting person in the room. She was extraordinary at that kind of presence when she was engaged. and at one point she caught me looking at her. She smiled. A warm smile, genuine, but brief. And then she turned back to the conversation like I was just another guest at the table. Not her partner. Not the man she was going to marry in a matter of months. Just another face across a table. I held that for a long time afterward. But I said nothing. Not yet. Because I didn't want to be that man. The jealous, suspicious, low-trust fiancé who makes accusations without evidence and poisons what's left of a relationship with his own insecurity. I had watched my older brother become that man in his first marriage. Watched him squeeze the life out of something that might have survived if he had just learned to ask instead of accuse. I had made quiet, private promises to myself that I would never let fear turn me into something controlling. So I swallowed every observation. I reasoned with every instinct. I kept making deposits into a joint account that was losing its value in ways that never showed up on any statement. The first real conversation happened about 5 months before the dinner. We were sitting on the back porch on a Sunday evening, the kind of quiet Sunday that used to be the best part of having a home together. I had made dinner, set the table outside, opened a good bottle of wine, and somewhere between the first and second glass, I looked at her across the table and said, carefully, "Are you happy?" She looked at me the way people look at a question they weren't expecting from a direction they weren't watching. "Of course I'm happy," she said. "You seem distant lately," I said. "I'm just tired from the new role," she said. "You don't seem tired," I said. "You seem energized, actually. Just not by anything here." That landed differently than I'd intended. She put her glass down. "What does that mean?" "It means I notice things," I said. "I notice that you come home more alive than you've been in months, and that none of that aliveness seems to involve me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I think you're projecting." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I am." And I let it go. Because she offered me the exit and I took it. That was my second mistake. The first was not asking the question 6 months sooner. I threw myself into the wedding preparations to compensate for the unease I was refusing to name directly. Booked the venue deposit. Finalized the photographer. Confirmed the caterer after 3 tastings. Started corresponding with a florist that Nicole had been genuinely enthusiastic about approximately 4 months earlier. Though I noticed, when I began those conversations on her behalf, that her enthusiasm for this particular vendor had quietly gone quiet. I did all of this while she did progressively less of it. At first I told myself she was overwhelmed at the new firm. Then I told myself she trusted my judgment on logistics. Then, very slowly and with considerable resistance, I had to sit with the possibility that she simply wasn't investing energy into something she was no longer fully committed to. By that point, I had already placed a substantial non-refundable deposit on a venue that seated 220 people. The house, my house, purchased 3 years prior, though she had lived in it with me for 2 of those years and had effectively co-designed its interior, had been partially refinanced to fund the larger life we were supposed to share. Her name was not on the deed. I had offered it once, early in the engagement. She had said we could revisit after the wedding. I remember being touched by that at the time. The idea of the wedding as threshold, the official crossing point of full commitment. I didn't realize she was making entirely different calculations using that timeline. The dinner was her idea. She suggested it on a Thursday afternoon, texted me the restaurant name, told me to make a reservation for Saturday evening. I didn't question it. We hadn't done something like that in a while. A proper dinner out, somewhere worth dressing for, with no occasion attached to justify it. I made the reservation. I wore the shirt she had once told me she loved. I arrived 7 minutes early because that is simply what I do. She arrived exactly on time, which told me something immediately. Nicole was constitutionally late to everything she didn't feel nervous about. Exact punctuality meant she had been thinking about this arrival. She looked beautiful. I want to say that honestly, because it's true and because I think it matters to record it accurately. She had made a real effort. A dress I hadn't seen before, her hair done differently, the specific, deliberate appearance of someone who understood that this particular evening required a prepared version of themselves. We ordered drinks. We ordered food. We talked about small things for the first 20 minutes or so. Her colleague's apartment renovation, a film we'd both meant to see and kept forgetting, something her sister had said on a call earlier in the week. And then, between the appetizers and the main course, she set her hands flat on the table in that deliberate way people do when they have finally arrived at the sentence they came to deliver. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I know," I said. She blinked. "You know?" "Not the specifics," I said. "But I've known something was coming for a while now." She looked almost relieved, like my awareness was going to make what followed easier for both of us. Then she said it. I've been spending a lot of time with Derek. Okay, I said. More than I should have. Okay, I said again. And what I feel for him, it's real. It's not just work, it's not just proximity. It's real. I kept my face completely neutral. I am very good at that. It's not a talent I ever sought to develop. It is simply the way my system responds to information that would otherwise undo me in public. I'm not trying to hurt you, she said. I know you're not, I said. But I can't keep pretending things are fine between us when I feel this way. And how do you feel? I asked. She took a breath. She had the look of someone who has spent weeks walking toward a particular sentence and has finally reached it. He makes me feel alive, she said. And then, with the quiet pride of someone who believes they are finally saying the brave and honest thing, he makes me feel alive in ways you never did. She said it with real conviction, with the certainty of a woman who had spent 6 months building the architecture of that sentence until it felt like revelation. I nodded. Once. Slowly. Okay, I said. And I picked up my fork and finished the calamari. She had expected something different. A reaction. An argument. Tears, perhaps. Or the version of me that collapses and begs. Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me how to fix this. Tell me there's still a chance. Instead, she got a man who calmly finished his appetizer and signaled the waiter for fresh water. That's all you're going to say, she said. What would you like me to say? I asked. Something, she said. Anything. You're sitting there like I just told you about road closures. How about this? I said, setting my fork down once more. I think you made a decision. I think you made it several months ago. And I think this dinner was always about announcing it, not discussing it. That's not. It's okay, I said. I'm not saying that as an accusation. I'm saying it because I think it's true. Are you angry? She asked. No, I said. I'm sad. But I'm not angry. There's a real difference between those two things, even when people treat them as interchangeable. We ate most of the main course in near silence. She tried twice more to explain Derek, how they had connected, how he saw things differently, how the relationship between she and I had felt like obligation for longer than she wanted to admit. I listened to all of it. I did not argue with any of it. Not because I agreed, but because I understood, in that moment, that argument would accomplish absolutely nothing. You cannot debate someone out of a feeling they've decided is the truth. Particularly not across a candlelit table while your engagement ring still sits on their left hand. I paid the bill. Of course I paid the bill. We drove home separately. She had taken her own car, which I now understood was a deliberate choice, not a logistical one. I sat in my driveway for a long time before going inside. The night was very still. I could see the light on in the kitchen through the front window. She had gotten home before me, apparently, or had never left. I sat with the stillness of the car for a while. I thought about 4 years. I thought about a February morning with low winter light and a ring I had been carrying in my pocket for 3 weeks. I thought about granite countertops with a gray vein she had driven 40 minutes to find. I thought about 3 sentences sent to a stranger about a photograph of an empty warehouse. The loneliest and most beautiful thing she had seen all year. I sat with all of that. And then I got out of the car. And at some point I went inside, made myself a glass of water, sat down at the desk in the guest room with a legal pad and a pen. And I wrote the list. I did not sleep much that night. But I made a list. I am, by nature and by profession, an organized person. I do not make major decisions in the heat of feeling. I make them carefully, and then I execute them completely. So while Nicole slept in our bedroom, or didn't sleep, I have no way of knowing, because I was in the guest room for the first time in 4 years. I sat at the small desk by the window, and I wrote down everything that needed to happen. The list was longer than I expected. Every item on it was cold and clear and necessary. I looked at it when I was done. I sat with it for a while, and at some point before dawn, I slept. I called the venue the following Monday morning. I explained that the wedding was canceled. I asked about the deposit. Non-refundable, as I knew, but I had read the contract 3 times before signing it, as I always do, and there was a clause allowing the deposit to roll over to a future event if cancellation occurred more than 10 weeks before the date. The wedding was 11 weeks away. I was inside the window by a margin of exactly 7 days. I asked them to hold it as a credit. Then the caterer. Same conversation, slightly different terms. Then the florist. Then the photographer, who was unexpectedly sympathetic in a way I hadn't prepared for and didn't particularly need, but I thanked him sincerely because he clearly meant it sincerely. I canceled the honeymoon arrangements. We hadn't purchased the flights yet, which was a small mercy, since Nicole had kept deferring that particular task every time I raised it. I understood now why she kept deferring. Every call took between 10 and 40 minutes. By the end of Monday, I had worked through most of the list. Nicole found out through the florist, who called her to confirm the cancellation and offer condolences. She called me immediately. "You canceled everything?" she said. "Yes," I said. "Already." There were time-sensitive clauses in the contracts. We needed to act before the 10-week window closed. We haven't even discussed what any of this means." "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "You told me what it means at dinner on Saturday. I'm just handling the logistics." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think you'd move this fast," she said. "I thought we'd have more time to." "To what?" I asked. Not unkindly, just honestly. "To figure things out," she said. "Nicole," I said, using her name with deliberate care. The way you use someone's name when you want them to understand that you are speaking to them specifically, not to the softer version of them you might otherwise invent to protect your own feelings. "You told me, at a restaurant you chose, in a dress you bought for the occasion, that another man makes you feel alive in ways I never did. What exactly remains to be figured out?" She had no answer for that. I thanked her for the conversation and ended the call. The house was next. I had a realtor I trusted, someone who had helped me purchase the property 3 years earlier. I called him on Tuesday morning. He was ready within a week. The market was favorable, and I had been paying attention to it for years. The first offer came in within 3 days of informal listing. It was above my expectations. I accepted it. Nicole found out through the realtor, who was a loose mutual acquaintance I had momentarily forgotten about. That call was considerably less calm than the previous ones. "You put the house on the market?" she said. "I sold it," I said. "There's a distinction. You can't just, we live here." "You live here," I said. "I own it. Closing is in 6 weeks. You have that time to make arrangements." 6 weeks, she said. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard from her before. Not quite anger. Something closer to the dawning understanding that the consequences she had quietly calculated in her head were somewhat different from the ones that were actually arriving. "Where are you going?" she asked. "I've already signed a lease on a furnished apartment downtown," I said. "I signed it this morning." Silence. "You're just gone," she said. "It's not that I'm gone," I said. "It's that there was nothing to stay for. We're not married. There are no proceedings, no joint property, no obligations requiring mediation. There's a house I own, a lease I've signed, and several accounts I need to close." "The accounts?" "The joint checking closes at end of month," I said. "Any automatic payments running through it should be migrated before then. I'm sending you a full itemization tonight. Every transaction in our shared accounts over the past 3 months, completely accurate." A silence long enough that I checked the call was still connected. "A spreadsheet," she said finally. "It's cleaner than a conversation," I said. "And it's accurate." The joint finances required the most care of anything on my list. We had a joint checking account for shared household expenses, a joint credit card of which I was the primary holder, a joint savings account seeded mostly from my earnings, but meaningfully contributed to by her over time. Her share of the savings was hers. I calculated it to the dollar. I transferred it directly to her personal account before I closed the joint one. I am not someone who takes what isn't mine. I am also not someone who leaves things vague in ways that could be revisited by someone with a compelling reason to revisit them. The joint credit card was zeroed and canceled. The joint savings was split accurately and closed. The joint checking was closed on the last day of the month exactly as I had said it would be. Nicole called twice during that process. Once to argue. Once, quieter, to ask if I was okay. The second call surprised me. "Are you okay?" she said. "I'm fine," I said. "You don't have to do all of this, so," clinically, she said. "You're allowed to be upset." "I am upset," I said. Being upset and being disorganized are 2 completely different things. She laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind that lives at the edge of something harder. The kind people produce when they recognize something true about a person they are in the process of losing. "That's very you," she said. "Yeah," I said. "It is." I want to be honest about the composure I'm describing, because it's easy to misread it. It was not performed. It was not a calculated strategy designed to make her feel something by contrast. It was simply how I process difficulty. I have always been the person in the room who gets quieter as things get harder. Not stronger, not colder, just more internal in my grief and more deliberate in my action. I grieve inward and act outward. So while I was making calls and closing accounts and coordinating a house sale, I was also in genuine pain. Not the theatrical kind. The quiet kind that sits behind your sternum like something lodged. I missed her. Not the Nicole of the last 6 months. Not the woman who came home buzzing about Derek and had stopped asking about my work and had planned a restaurant evening specifically to tell me that another man understood her in ways I never had. I missed the Nicole who had found my portfolio on a professional platform and sent me 3 precise sentences about an empty warehouse and winter light. That woman had found me through something I had made alone, in silence, with nothing but patience and observation. And I never stopped honoring what that meant. I just eventually had to accept that she had moved on from it, and that no amount of organized grief would restore what we had both allowed to quietly erode between us. So I grieved, privately, in the east-facing apartment I had chosen for myself, surrounded by almost nothing that we had shared. I left nearly everything in the house. The kitchen things she had selected, the art she had found at various markets over the years, the coffee table we had hauled together from an estate sale on a rainy October afternoon, laughing in the parking lot because it barely fit in the borrowed truck. I left that table. I left all of it. Not out of generosity, out of clarity. I was not going to fill a new space with the furniture of a life that no longer existed. I took my equipment, my drives, my books, and a handful of pieces I had owned before Nicole and I had ever merged our lives. Everything else was hers or ours, and the distinction had stopped mattering. The apartment was spare and clean in mine. Within 2 weeks of moving in, I was sleeping through the night again. That single fact told me a great deal about the weight I had been carrying while still calling it contentment. The first proper morning in the apartment, I made coffee in a French press I had bought specifically because the one we'd shared had been a wedding registry item and therefore felt wrong to take. I stood at the east-facing window with the mug and watched the early light come into the room. It was a simple thing. A cup of coffee, a window, morning light, but it was entirely and only mine. And that made it feel like something I hadn't had in a long time. I didn't name that feeling immediately. I let it sit. And a few days later, unpacking the last of my books onto a shelf I had assembled alone on a Tuesday evening while listening to a radio program about deep-sea geology, I named it peace. Not happiness, not yet. Not healing, in any dramatic sense. Just peace. The particular quiet of a life that has been stripped down to what is actually yours. My closest friend was Pete. He had known Nicole for most of the relationship. He had given a toast at our engagement dinner that made her cry the good kind of tears and made me quietly proud to know him. He found out about the split roughly 2 weeks after everything had been set in motion, through Ben, whose wife had run into Nicole somewhere. He called on a Friday night. There was a long pause before he said anything. I heard, he said. From who? Ben's wife ran into Nicole, he said. Ah, I said. You want to talk about it? Not particularly, I said. Do you want to come over and not talk about it while we watch something? Yeah, I said. Actually, yeah, I do. We watched a documentary about Formula One racing for 3 hours and didn't discuss Nicole once. Pete is exactly the right kind of friend. He understands that sometimes the most useful thing you can offer someone is your presence without your opinions tied to it. Weeks accumulated. The house closed. The proceeds settled cleanly. My business continued through all of it. I had 2 major shoots that month and completed both on schedule. Work, I had always found, was a reliable companion to grief. Not a cure, not even exactly a distraction. More like a daily reminder that you are still capable of doing the thing you were built to do, which is its own quiet evidence that nothing essential has been broken. For months past, reasonably quietly, I settled into the apartment in a way that surprised me with its ease. New clients came. I started running in the mornings, which I hadn't done consistently in years. The neighborhood near the apartment had a path that wound along a narrow river, and the light in that place in the early hour was extraordinary in the specific way that light is when no one has arranged it. It just falls, honest and unhurried. I ran 4 mornings a week and thought about very little during those runs except the path and the water and the sound of my own breathing finding its rhythm. And on a morning somewhere around mile 3 of a longer run, I realized I was becoming someone I recognized from before the relationship. Someone lighter in a way that had nothing to do with weight. Someone less managed. Someone who had not spent the better part of 2 years quietly absorbing the low-grade signal that he was not quite enough for the person who was supposed to be choosing him every day. I hadn't named that while I was living inside it. It is genuinely hard to name the shape of a feeling from its center. You need distance. You need the particular clarity that only arrives when you stop trying to hold something together that has already decided to come apart. And once the distance arrived, so did the clarity. Not in one clean rush. In pieces. On river paths at 6 in the morning. In the quiet of a studio apartment on a Tuesday night. In the uncomplicated satisfaction of delivering a shoot that met every expectation the client had communicated and several they hadn't thought to communicate. Piece by piece, I reassembled the version of myself that had existed before I had quietly, without realizing it, begun to shape himself around someone else's diminishing interest. That process is slower than grief, and less dramatic, but it is considerably more useful. I also, and this is a small thing but I think it matters, I started cooking again. Properly cooking. I had always enjoyed it, years ago, before the relationship had settled into a comfortable division of tasks where Nicole handled most of the kitchen and I handled most of the practical maintenance of the house. It had not been an unfair arrangement. But somewhere in it, I had lost the particular pleasure of feeding myself deliberately, of choosing ingredients for no reason except that I wanted them, of making something that existed only because I decided to make it, for an audience of exactly one. I made things I hadn't made in years. Nothing elaborate. A lamb shoulder that took most of a Sunday afternoon. A soup I had learned from a colleague a long time ago and never bothered to repeat. Simple things, made slowly, with the radio on and no schedule to maintain. It sounds like nothing, but it was the kind of nothing that, accumulated over weeks and months, becomes a life that actually belongs to you. And once I had the vocabulary, the clarity was almost startling. I hadn't just lost a relationship. I had lost a particular kind of invisible weight. And the losing of it, in the strange moral arithmetic of grief, felt something like gain. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn. I had a shoot scheduled, a renovated commercial building downtown with original Victorian detailing and afternoon light that did something remarkable with the original hardwood floors. I was on my second coffee, reviewing my shot list, when Pete called. Unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. "You have a minute?" he said. "Always," I said. "You're going to hear this eventually," he said. "And I'd rather it come from me first." "Okay," I said. I set the coffee down. Derek and Nicole broke up. I let that sit for a moment. "When?" I asked. "A few weeks ago." Ben's wife got it directly from Nicole. "Okay," I said. "That's really it." Pete said. "What would you like me to say?" I asked. "I don't know, something," he said. "How did it end?" I asked. Not because I needed to know, but because Pete had called with the full story and I wasn't going to make him carry it alone. "Apparently," Pete said, in the carefully neutral tone of a man delivering information he finds both fascinating and slightly uncomfortable. "It unraveled quickly once it became an actual relationship. Once Nicole was genuinely available. Once she wasn't attached to someone else." Derek sort of. "Cool." I said nothing. Pete continued. "From what Ben's wife understands, the whole thing was considerably more compelling when there was complexity attached to it. When it became ordinary, daily life, schedules, laundry, the actual unglamorous texture of being with someone in a real way, Derek lost interest. And apparently, there was someone from his climbing group who had caught his attention around the same time things started feeling routine. He thrives on beginnings," I said. "Exactly," Pete said. "New chapter, new rush. That appears to be the pattern." A silence. "You okay?" Pete said. "Yeah," I said. "I'm actually okay." "Really?" he said. "Pete," I said. "I live in an apartment I chose for myself. I have a savings account I rebuilt in 4 months. I have a shoot in 2 hours that I'm genuinely looking forward to. I haven't felt this much like myself in more than a year." Pete was quiet for a moment. "You're not even a little vindicated?" he said. I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I feel something," I said. "But it's not vindication. It's more like the confirmation of something I had already worked out." "Which is what?" he said. "That the thing she called being alive," I said slowly, "was just the adrenaline of consequence-free excitement. It wasn't love. It wasn't connection. It was the thrill of disruption dressed up as revelation. And those two things feel identical until the consequences actually arrive." Pete was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot of insight for a Tuesday afternoon," he said. "I've had 4 months to build up to it," I said. "I want to be careful here, because this part is easy to get wrong. It would be easy to frame what I just described as justice completing its arc. But that's not what it was. Their relationship ending didn't change anything that had already happened. It didn't return the 4 years I had given. It didn't unsay what Nicole had said at dinner. It didn't restore the house or the plan or the version of a future I had built in my head and on paper and in actual non-refundable deposits. None of that came back. And none of it needed to. Because somewhere in the 4 months since I'd moved into my sparse, east-facing apartment and started running along the river in the mornings, I had stopped waiting for the story to resolve in a way that proved I had been right. I had simply started living. That shift is quieter than it sounds, but it is not a small thing. I had coffee around that time with an old colleague named Gwen, someone I had worked alongside years earlier and occasionally crossed paths with at industry events. We talked about work for a while. Then she asked about the engagement, having heard through the professional network that something had ended. I gave her the short version. She listened without interrupting, which I found genuinely rare and appreciated. Then she said something I have returned to more than once since. "You know what I think was the bravest thing?" she said. "I'm not sure any of it qualifies as brave," I said. "The not arguing," she said. "That night at the restaurant. You didn't fight her. You didn't make her wrong so that you could feel right. There was nothing to argue with," I said. She told me the truth. "That's exactly what I mean," she said. "Most people can't let truth be truth when it costs them something. They fight it, reframe it, turn the other person into a villain so the loss feels like something other than just a loss." "I felt the loss," I said. "I know," she said. "That's precisely what I mean." I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. She was right in a way I hadn't found my own language for yet. The hardest part of that night at the restaurant wasn't keeping my composure. The hardest part was accepting, in real time, that what Nicole was describing, her feelings, her pull, her sense of aliveness, was real. Not fair, not kind, but real. And once something is real, the only honest response is acknowledgement. Everything else is just argument with the weather. What I know now that I didn't know at that dinner table is that Nicole wasn't entirely wrong about everything. Not about all of it. There had been a flatness between us in the final stretch. A comfortable mutual orbiting where we had both, slowly and without announcement, stopped trying to discover each other and had started simply managing the shared logistics of a life. That happens. It is one of the most ordinary tragedies of long relationships. The slow, almost imperceptible replacement of curiosity with habit. What Nicole was wrong about was the diagnosis. She looked at the flatness and decided it was me. She decided I was the source and that Derek represented the cure. She was wrong. The flatness was us, both of us, and it was the kind of thing partnerships survive all the time, if both people are still willing to choose to be in the room. But she had already left the room. In small, invisible increments over the course of months, she had been stepping backward toward the door. And by the time she said what she said across that table, she was barely still standing in the frame. I could not have brought her back, and I have spent enough time with that truth to know, now, that I would not have wanted to. Pete mentioned Nicole once more, a couple of months after the Derek call. "She's doing okay," he said, almost casually. "Back at her old firm. Making some changes, apparently." "Good," I said, and I meant it. Not as a performance of graciousness. The way you mean it when someone you once loved is no longer someone you feel entangled with. When enough time and honest processing have turned the loss into something genuinely close to goodwill. I hope she finds what she was looking for. I hope she finds the kind of aliveness that sustains past the first season of a relationship. I hope, if she finds it, it's with someone who can hold it steady once the initial rush settles into the ordinary. And I hope, more than anything, that she learns the difference between love and excitement before she invests 4 more years in something she'll eventually mistake for both. But that is her journey now. It stopped being mine the moment she set her hands flat on that restaurant table and delivered the sentence she'd been rehearsing. "My business is better than it has ever been. I moved into a slightly larger apartment recently, still east-facing, still modest. But with the second room, I've converted into a proper studio space. I've been shooting more personal work alongside the commercial projects. Long exposure shots at dawn. The city in its private, pre-public hour when the light is completely unperformed and falls exactly as it falls with no arrangement at all. I entered 2 pieces in a regional exhibition last autumn. One sold to a collector I had never met, who sent a brief note through the gallery saying the image reminded her of a particular quality of silence she had been trying to describe for years. I read that note twice. Then I put it on the shelf above my desk. It lives there now, between 2 books I've had since before any of this happened. I still run 4 mornings a week. I still get everywhere 7 minutes early. I still read contracts 3 times before signing them. If you've made it this far expecting a tidy lesson, I'm going to disappoint you. I don't have a lesson. I have an experience, and the experience is this. Sometimes the person you chose doesn't keep choosing you back. Not through cruelty, not through calculation. Sometimes they simply arrive, quietly and gradually, at a place where the version of themselves they want to become doesn't include the life they built with you. When that happens, you have a choice. You can fight the leaving, or you can make the leaving clean. I chose clean, and I am not at any point in the months since, not in the hardest of the early nights in a spare apartment with boxes half unpacked around me. I am not once sorry for that choice. The man who sat across that restaurant table tried to warn her, not with words, with silence, with a single nod that meant I hear you, and I will now act accordingly. She mistook that silence for surrender. It wasn't. It was simply a man who had learned, across 4 years and 14 months of engagement and a house with granite countertops driven 40 minutes to find, that not every door deserves a scene when it closes. Some doors, you close quietly. You lock them carefully, and you walk down the street toward whatever comes next. This past week, on a Tuesday morning just before 6, I was on the river path. The light had done something unusual just after sunrise, a particular angle and a particular mist that turned the surface of the water into something I don't have a photographic vocabulary for yet. I stood on the bank for about 12 minutes just watching it. I did not take a picture. Not every beautiful thing needs to be captured. Some of them you just stand in for a while. And that, more than anything else I've told you, is how I know I'm okay.